Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Stosny, and welcome to Anger, Anxiety, Stress, and Basic Humanity. Now, after 30 years of work on problems of anger, anxiety, and resentment, and those are really the barriers to managing stress. If you don't have any anger, anxiety, or resentment, stress won't be that big a deal for you. And after publishing a half a dozen books on those topics, I still get a few sarcastic emails, and they sound like this. I want to manage anger, anxiety, and stress, but I'm not interested in becoming a better person. That's the sarcastic part, because all of my work is really about becoming a better person. For myself, mostly, and then I try to share that with others. Your chances of managing anger, anxiety, and stress without becoming a better person are zero. In other words, the only way to manage anger, anxiety, and stress is to become a better person. And that's because by the time we're adults, most anger, resentment, anxiety, and reactions to stress are conditioned responses. We do the same thing under the same conditions and the same physiological states over and over again. To change them, we have to develop new conditioned responses, which takes willpower, practice, and work. So what that looks like is most anger, resentment, and anxiety really come from a temporary drop in self-value. Not all of it, but most of it. And we've learned to, when we have sensed that drop in self-value or the rise in self-doubt, to get resentful, angry, or anxious. To change those conditioned responses, we have to develop new ones that will make us raise self-value whenever it drops. And then you don't need the anger, resentment, or anxiety to protect you from the drop in self-value. That's what reconditioning means. That's what it looks like. And our website, CompassionPower.com, has techniques that will build new conditioned responses. But new conditioned responses alone won't be enough to significantly improve our lives and relationships. There's just no way around it. We have to become better persons. We become better persons by staying in touch with basic humanity. Basic humanity is the innate survival-based capacity for interest in the well-being of others. It's survival-based because early humans could not have survived against more plentiful and powerful predators without banding together in emotionally bonded social units to defend and hunt collectively. One of us against a saber-toothed tiger wouldn't have a chance, but a group of us with rocks could prevail. Small, emotionally bonded, cooperative communities became the natural order of human social organization. We remain so dependent on the consideration and cooperation of others that we condemn even minor deviations from it by other people. In other words, we're hypersensitive to when other people are inconsiderate or cooperative, but hardly sensitive at all to when we're not. And that's because there's only a very tiny portion of the prefrontal cortex that goes to objectively analyzing our own behavior. Otherwise, the brain really isn't interested in doing it. Now, the driving fear in out-group phenomenon, that's what's instrumental in racism. We're the in-group, everybody else is the out-group. The driving fear is that those people, won't be compassionate or cooperative. And in wartime, we dehumanize the enemy by depicting them as chaotic and not compassionate, or so overly domineering, autocratic, that there's no real cooperation, there's just submission. Now, basic humanity is motivation, and that's really, it's far more important as a motivation than as a feeling. So what does it prepare us to do? Basic humanity motivates behaviors that are respectful, helpful, valuing, nurturing, protective, and altruistic. In adversity, it motivates sacrifice. In emergency, it motivates rescue. Now here are levels of basic humanity. There's a high level, it's all people are connected. They have a drive to enhance and protect the welfare of others, sacrifice for the greater good. Now, most of us don't function on that level, only under emergencies. More day-to-day levels of basic humanity are moderate, feeling equal to all, superior to none, respectful of everyone, generally helpful, though you might not go out of your way to do it. If it's presented with you, you're generally helpful. And act on deeper values rather than reacting in kind to others. You know, it's the principle, if you react to a jerk like a jerk, what does that make you? And then there's low levels of basic humanity, and that's when you're likely to feel superior or inferior, and those are really opposite sides of the same coin. Your only motivation to devalue someone, put someone down, or act superior to them is if you're feeling inferior yourself at that moment. If your self-value is high, you have absolutely no motivation to act superior. You're more manipulative than helpful, resentful, and vindictive. Undeveloped level of basic humanity is a sense of isolation. You're kind of the embittered loner, contemptuous, vengeful willingness to harm. Now, I believe that basic humanity is a condition of personal growth. In other words, the more in touch with the most humane part of yourself, the more likely you are to grow personally, intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally. Basic humanity allows us to grow beyond the limitations of personal experience and prejudice. Without it, we become locked in a prison of self. The sense of self grows fragile, in constant need of validation by others, intolerant of differences, resentful, anxious, or angry. Other people matter only to the extent that they validate my inherently biased experience. So they have to validate my experience, which by definition is going to be subjective and highly biased. Now, the prominent emotions of basic humanity. Emotions are motivations. We stress way too much what they feel like. The most important part of emotions, it means to move, is what they prepare us to do. They send action messages to the muscles and organs of the body to prepare us to do something. So that's the motivation. Emotions are an important part of the mammalian motivational system. Compassion is motivation to help relieve pain, suffering, discomfort, or hardship. So you're not just feeling sorry for someone, you actually want to help. Kindness is motivation to help others be well. Guilt is motivation to be true to personal values or community standards. So if you violate those, you feel guilty, and the guilt will motivate you to be true to them. Shame is motivation to succeed or compensate. The experience of shame is a perception of the self as failure or defective. But the motivation of the shame is to do something different that will be successful or compensate for any perceived faults. And anxiety is motivation to avoid exposure to guilt or shame. So you've done something to violate standards, or you're trying to be phony so people don't see whatever faults you perceive yourself to have. That's what most anxiety comes from. Not all anxiety, certainly, but the anxiety around basic humanity, which tends to be the most troublesome, the hardest to regulate. And violations of basic humanity, and we all violate it. But when we do, it automatically causes guilt, shame, and anxiety, not to punish us, but to motivate humane behavior. That's the self-correcting part of the motivational system. If we let it go on its own, it will self-correct. It'll lead us to do the right thing. If we allow guilt, shame, and anxiety to work the way they really evolved to do. But this natural motivation is subverted by what I call the toddler coping mechanisms. And that's blame, denial, and avoidance. 2-year-olds begin blaming, denying, avoiding. You ask a 2-year-old how the toy got broken, they'll blame it on somebody else, or they'll say, I don't know, or they'll hide or distract themselves, won't answer you. Blame, denial, avoidance. We start doing it at 2. And when we do it as adults, it tends to cut us off from basic humanity. Now, toddler coping mechanisms invoke the anger resentment formula. The formula for anger is vulnerable feeling, any vulnerable feeling, guilt, shame, anxiety, or sadness, plus blame. If you blame it on someone else, it becomes anger. If you take away the blame, it's those other vulnerable feelings. Resentment, it's a vulnerable feeling plus blame, denial, or avoidance. So if you take away blame, denial, or avoidance, it'll be whatever the vulnerable feeling is. You add blame, denial, or avoidance, it turns into resentment. So anger is not really the problem. That's why anger management, to the extent that it works at all, tends not to produce very much long-term change. Because if you're still in the habit of blame, denying, avoiding, that's going to cut you off from basic humanity. It's going to make you feel more guilt, shame, and anxiety and turn into more anger. So it's the blame, denial, and avoidance and cutting us off from basic humanity. That's the problem. And that's what we have to identify and fix. Now, the paradox of basic humanity. Cultures are far more humane now than ever before in human history. You know, if you want lots of examples for that, read Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. And he gives copious examples of it. There are others too, but he brings them all together. So why is it so hard for individuals to stay in touch with basic humanity when, by and large, most cultures are more humane? Not all, certainly, but most. The reason I think it's hard for us as individuals to be more humane, even though culturally we are, is there's so many of us and we're all different. See, the mammalian brain distrusts differences, and that's true of all animals. The human bias is to distrust people who look different, believe different things, and have different values. Now, here's the paradox, yet our lives are clearly enriched by differences. Sameness is boring. Appreciation of differences produces intellectual, emotional, and spiritual growth. So we distrust differences, but they enrich our lives. Now, how to maintain basic humanity in a diverse culture? And I think that's the great challenge of the new century. It's because all cultures all over the world are more diverse than ever before, and that's a good thing. It adds a lot of richness to our lives, but it also makes basic humanity, sense of community, those things are more elusive when there's differences. And that's, the way our brains are. They evolved in small social units where everybody was kind of the same. So the inherent mistrust of differences came out of fear. Now, the best way to maintain basic humanity in diverse cultures is accept complexity and appreciate or tolerate differences. Accept the complexity of human beings. When you're sure you understand someone, you're most likely oversimplifying based on superficial observations through inherently biased lenses. So I'm not saying you have to understand everyone, because I'm not sure that's even possible. But just understand that you don't really get them. Whatever your negative judgment is, even if that's correct about that one behavior, your judgment about the people, the group of people, is inherently wrong because they're far more complex than that. So just appreciate the complexity. You don't have the whole picture, nowhere near the whole picture. Appreciate as many differences as you can and tolerate the ones you can't appreciate. So accept the complexity of human beings, appreciate their differences, and tolerate the ones you can't appreciate. Basic humanity and personal well-being. I think out of touch with basic humanity, we can't achieve a personal sense of well-being. And that's because we tend to make invidious, error-prone judgments about those with different values. Instead, we must appreciate what we share with most others, and that's value categories. See, if we focus on specific values, we're going to see differences, and the innate distrust of differences will start to kick in. We got to override that with the prefrontal cortex, which we must strive to do, but it's more difficult to do that. But if we just focus on value categories that we're likely to share with other people, the value categories that from all anthropological evidence have been important to humans since our earliest times on Earth are family, and that's about the maintenance of emotional bonds. Now, whom we maintain emotional bonds with are going to be different from other people, so we might even maintain them differently because culture impacts like family interactions. But what's important to the vast majority of humans is the establishment and maintenance of emotional bonds. Spirituality, that's a drive for connection to something larger than the self. Now, what you believe is going to be different from what other people believe, but that drive for connection to something larger can make you feel connected to people who are different. Community is identification with or connection to a group of people. Your sense of community is going to be different from others. But the importance of community, and it is important to all humans, we don't function well outside of communities because our brains evolved in small, mostly tightly knit communities. An appreciation of natural and creative beauty, relating to categories of values, makes us feel more connected and more tolerant. Now, what makes me like myself better? You know, in general, feelings are not a good guide for becoming a good person, a better person. You might be a good person, but we always want to strive to be better persons. They're not a good guide because they're always, they're embedded in the past, and they're going to make us select behaviors that'll make us repeat the past. So they make growth very difficult. We'll just keep doing the same things over and over. But one way that they can be useful is if you focus on what makes me like myself better, just a feeling of self-value. Is it focus on how my values differ from someone else, or how the categories of our values are similar? Which do you like yourself better considering? I don't, you know, if you need adrenaline to answer this, that's telling you you're not really opting on value, you're opting on power. See, adrenaline gives you a temporary sense of power and confidence. That's why when there's self-doubt, we tend to get irritable and angry. We want the adrenaline to oversimplify. But value comes more from endorphins, which make you feel better about yourself. So is it how my values differ from someone else's, or how the categories of our values are similar? Do I like myself better when I'm devaluing other people, or when I'm in touch with basic humanity? Now, the more in touch with basic humanity, the more humane we feel. Out of touch with it, we feel less humane. So thank you for staying in touch with your basic humanity, and visit us on CompassionPower.com.